So this story takes place in Banjul, the capital of the Gambia. There's supposed to be a summit where all the heads of states in all the different African countries are supposed to come and meet and talk about the future. There's this new plan called Path Omega, which the presidents are supposed to discuss about. This is supposed to be chart the way for the future, supposed to bring prosperity and the like. Now, the way this story begins, there are four strangers who have been booked into the Seamount Hotel. These four people have never met each other, but they're here for a specific purpose. Now, the first stranger is Professor Karanja Kimani. This guy studied at Oxford University, and he went to be a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. So during that time, that's when he met his wife. They basically had a good life together. Her name is Asia Omondi. They have a daughter and everything. They're not pretty rich, and what really bothers him is how politicians and MPs, MPs mostly, make so much money compared to professors. Like, for example, he has a beat down car, and he also has this guy who they used to be a colleague with, but he left. He went to become an MP called Newborn. He's pretty rich now, but when he was in academia, he wasn't really that rich. So that really bothers him, and he calls it like a legislative coup, because the MPs sort of used legislation to get all this money, and not like force like you'd expect how a coup is like. So basically, this bothers him. So they have a daughter, and she always wants to use the father's car, but she can't because it's pretty beat down. So one day she's riding the bus, she gets in an accident and dies. Asia blames Kimani for her daughter's death because she feels like if he had a better car, she would have been able to use the car, and she decides to leave him. It's like too much for her. She can never see him the same again. And the worst part about it is that she leaves him to go and be married by this other guy called Newborn, who's Kimani's former colleague. He really doesn't like him that much because he's an MP and everything. Now Kimani goes to confront Newborn, and they get into a scuffle. It ends up with now Kimani going to jail for 6 months. At the university, he's demoted now because he was a professor. He's now like a normal lecturer. So it's pretty bad for him. This is when now Tad Longway comes in and tries to convince him to join Path Alpha. Kimani agrees, and that's the beginning of their relationship. Tad Longway is a South African who works at this organization called AGDA. It's like, African Development sort of think tank. So the second guy is a guy called Comrade Melusi. This guy fought hand in hand with the Zimbabwean president, to take down the former colonialist. But now when the Zimbabwean president got into power, he became an authoritarian figure. And now they don't get along much with Melusi. Melusi has even tried to vie against him, but he loses a lot because this guy is, he's a strongman kind of guy and controls the whole country. Also, Melusi has lost his wife due to tribal clashes, and he blames the president for that. So he's really bitter about the president. He also meets with Tad Longway, and Tad Longway convinces him to join this Path Alpha. Now, the other guy is called Engineer Seif Tahir. This guy is from Libya. He went to study in Paris, came back. He was working for the Libyan government for this project called First of Allah. It's supposed to be a nuclear weapon project. And he was really interested in wanting to show Libya's might and weaponry and all these things. During his work, he has this colleague called Mahmoud. So he tries to hit on her. He doesn't, he's not the very best at that stuff. He takes it as a rejection, and then he becomes all bitter. On one day, he slaps her because he says that she removes her veil, which is not supposed to happen because of the culture there in Libya. She retaliates and pokes his eye out. This guy now has lost an eye. He goes to court, and then the punishment for her is one of her eyes has to be taken out through surgery. So this is where he's coming from, and also Tad Longway convinces him to join. The final guy is a guy called Pastor Chineke. Chineke used to be this speed demon. He just used to be, live life on the fast lane. And, he was a pretty obnoxious guy. People didn't like him because of how reckless he was. One day he gets into an accident and somehow survives it. And he sees that as a miracle. And now he becomes a pastor. Becomes a pretty successful pastor. So one day as he's preaching, he preaches against the government, the president. And that rubs the government the wrong way. He's arrested and he's banned from preaching. Now, Tad Longway is also able to convince him to join his cause. Now, when these four men are at the hotel, they're all in different rooms. They've never met each other. They each get a call from a guy who calls himself the guide. And this guy tells them, go through the documents that are in your room and we'll give you further instructions. So the documents, one is the Path Omega, which is supposed to be discussed at the summit. And then there's Path Alpha, which is the new plan that Tad Longway and the group from Agda want to move forward with it and try to sneak it into the summit. So basically, that's what they're supposed to do. They're trying to find a way how this thing is going to be discussed at the summit. Now, this guide guy, his name is Dr. Afolabi. He's a Nigerian. He's written a book about Africa, the troubles of Africa, and with that, he's seen as a guide to guide through the whole process. So he's actually supposed to help the heads of state through this process and discussing about Path Omega. And at the same time, he's actually working, trying to sneak in Path Alpha with Agda. There's also a lady called Fiona McKenzie who works for the Gambian News. Fiona was adopted by Scottish missionaries who were in Banjul at the time and was raised up by them. She works now at the Gambia News as a journalist. So she's really trying to, do a lot of interviews. And she does have an encounter with Dr. Afolabi where at the first time he's a bit irritated by her because she's really asking him a lot of questions. As the story continues, Fiona is told by her boss that she's now being moved to the Voice of America. So, and there now she meets different co-workers. Now she meets this guy whose name is Nick. He's an American, and he's basically more into intelligence. He has this thing called the silent listener. This thing is able to spy on people's conversation, and through that, do a series of things that he does. He's able to pick out different things people are saying, and he can piece together if there's a conspiracy or if there's something happening, people are planning to do something. So he explains to her how he's been able to pick up conversation between 5 different people, 1 central guy and 4 different people, which is, the original group. She's really intrigued by this and she wants to know more about it. Now, she continues to encounter Afolabi and they sort of develop this relationship where they're kind of friends. So she reveals to him that, hey, there's this guy who refers to himself as the guide and he's planning something with these, the 4 guys. Dr. Afolabi now has to confess to her and tell her, hey, I'm the guide. But he's really fascinated and wants to meet now this guy Nick who came up with the whole silent listener thing. Now, the way this summit is planned, it's shown like it's a good thing for the people of Gambia. But the problem is hosting all these heads of states brings a huge headache. For example, a lot of water is directed towards bringing all, making fountains to impress people. And now that takes water away from the normal people in Gambia. Another thing is they put up a lot of security checks for people. And that creates an opportunity for police to harass people and extort them. So it's really not the best things for the people of Gambia, even though the way it's shown like it's a good thing because all these heads of state are here. The summit begins, and you can see this a lot of politics at play, even with how the Gambian president has to greet specific presidents like the president of Nigeria, the president of Libya, the president of Kenya, and the president of Zimbabwe. He sort of has to be careful with how he's greeting people, even the way seating arrangements are made. It's a whole circus with how this thing is going. So there's a guy called Minister Zinto. He's the one who's supposed to propose, let's talk about this thing. He's a huge proponent of Path Omega. So they start discussing. One of the presidents says he's not even going to read this document. He doesn't care. It starts being back and forth. Some of the presidents you can see that there's sort of, they're antagonizing each other. It's a whole problem. And this is when Path Alpha is introduced. Now the 4 gentlemen are told it's time for them to make an appeal. They each come trying to make an appeal, but Melusi, when his time comes, he rushes to attack the president of Zimbabwe. But he's grabbed and he's taken out. Now they have to decide because it's basically a chaos, and there's something that they call the trick, which some members who are behind this summit didn't want it to be a unanimous decision. So they came up with an idea where they can make confusion and then it will pass through. So it becomes this whole thing. And then it's like they have to now figure out a way for how they can vote for it. So they choose like a few presidents to go and sit down and talk about it, and they meet the next day. So the next day comes, and the way the presidents decide to use it, they call it this sort of matrix system. Is they like flip a coin, if it lands of heads or tails, this will happen, this will happen. It's basically we're going to bet on the future of Africa. Whichever it lands, we're not even going to discuss the issues that are going to affect Africa. We're just going to bet on it, and whichever it lands, that's the plan that we'll take. So they do that, and Path Alpha wins. Now one of the presidents sees this as a first and takes out a pistol. Now when he takes out a pistol, the chair of the summit calls for security to come. Then the president is like disarmed. He takes back his pistol and everything. It's a whole chaos. Now it ends with now the 4 gentlemen, not the 4, because the next day Melusi has not been seen since he tried to attack the president. But now the 4 are celebrating, and basically that's how the book ends. No plan is discussed. there's really not much that's talking. It's more about politics and just egos going at each other. Yeah, so basically that is Fathers of Nations by Paul Vitta. Now, I know there's so much I left out in this book because there's so many things he talks about which I really could not talk about every single detail about. But yeah, I would recommend you to read the book, and because it's more of a satire of how Africa is run basically, and you'll find it interesting how almost most countries or African countries will see a similarity with how the presidents behave. If you'd like for us to do more book reviews, please comment below and subscribe. Thank you.